Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am delighted on this episode to be talking with Elana K. Arnold. Did I get your name correct? Is that
You
right?
did, and we didn't even practice. And you remembered the K,
Fantastic.
which is the most important part. So thank you.
We have the K. The K is intact. So thanks very much for joining, and thanks also for bringing a fur friend back there. Um, one of my fur friends is currently recovering from surgery. We have like a 13-pound little dog that just had to have surgery. So
I hope she heals well.
well, thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. We try to take care of the fur friends. So thanks also for joining and talking. And I usually start out with some background about the author and give you the chance to share a little bit about your history as an author. And I'll mention Boy Called Bat being probably the first book that I discovered of yours. I was teaching a graduate literacy course and came across this book and love it and love the representation that's part of the book and just the fun-loving nature of the story. Speaking of taking care of fur friends, actually.
Yes. Oh,
Uh,
it's a big part of my daily life.
oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm also a big fan of The House That Wasn't There. I really enjoyed that
Oh,
book.
thank you. I appreciate that. That's a pandemic baby, so I don't get to
Hmm.
hear very much about it, but I am so proud of that book, and I'm thrilled to hear that you liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of a sub theme of the show that I point back to books that were released in the pandemic, in part because I
Right.
was reading a lot during the
Yeah.
pandemic. So, big fan of that one as well. And you have a new book that's on the way that we'll talk about. But I promised a path to authoring question. So, um, would you please tell us about
Yeah.
that?
Well, I was a kid who was better with words than people, and had a real hard time, socially making friends, understanding people. And I just loved books because, they tell you what they're thinking right there
Hmm.
on the
Hmm.
page. I always like to think about the picture in like comics, with the little thought bubbles and everyone you can see what they're thinking. And I used to just wish that everyone would walk around with thought bubbles so that I wouldn't have to guess and not always get it right. Usually didn't get it right. And I just have always been a giant story lover. And I was raised with free access to reading. My dad was a huge reader. My grandmother had, a beautiful homemade library. It was just a bedroom, but the closet doors had been taken off and shelves. My grandfather had built in shelves, and there was a little ladder that leaned up. So, like library, it was awesome.
Hmm.
And I was just encouraged to read whatever I wanted. And my reading time was really seen as like sacred work by my grandmother. She would bring me like little offerings of cut up fruit and bowls of ice cream as I read, and I would just lie on the carpet and read books and sort of chase the little patch of sunshine around. And it was my favorite thing to do. And it seemed to me that the only thing better than reading stories would be to write my own. And I started very young. And I wasn't, very bad at finishing. I didn't finish things. And
Hmm.
then I would feel very guilty and bad. And like I wasn't a real writer because I didn't finish. And it took me until after several books were published, actually, to realize that the job of a child who wants to be a writer is not to finish things. It's
Hmm.
just to play and to try not to allow shame to sneak into their writing space because, then of course you don't want to do something that you feel shame about. So yeah, so whenever I talk to people and how to help my kid be a writer, it's like just don't encourage, just love everything that they write and let them read whatever they want. So that's what I did, and then I went to graduate school, and that sucked the love out of writing for me. It was the '90s, and it was one of those literary MFA type programs where it was very conscriptive. What is conscriptive a word, or did I think I was
I like
conscripted
that.
into
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. It
Yeah,
works.
anyway, yes, the world of literature, of writing sort of literary fiction was very narrow in the '90s. And I felt that I was faking it, trying,
Mm.
I could write those stories, those short stories, but I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin when I was doing it. And then I left writing for a while and declared I was just a reader. And of course, whenever you allow yourself the joy of reading just to read and not because you're reading the books you think you should read so that you can write like those books or whatever, um, it turns out that if you're a writer, you start to want to write again because you're so
Mm.
inspired by all the books you read. So that happened to
Hmm.
me in the late 2000s during the Great Recession. Actually, I had a blog for the first time in my life.
Ah.
it's a little bit longer of an answer than you wanted, but so anyway, Great Recession. I had two little kids. My husband had the bigger job. We had an enormous mortgage, and he got laid off, and we could only afford to pay our mortgage for I think 2 months. So we decided, and he was miserable at his job, and so we decided to sell the house and the car and all of our possessions and move ourselves and our dog and our ferret and our two kids into an old RV and just hit the road for parts unknown. And I started a blog called People Do Things because that was my mantra. Why shouldn't we sell everything and move into an RV? People do things. We can do this thing. And for the first time in my life, I had a readership because people were reading blogs in 2009. And people were writing to me and telling me about their struggles and about their story. And it was incredible to have an audience, even if it was like 15 people. And then we ended up in Corvallis, Oregon, where we both applied for jobs. And I was the one to land a job first. I got a job teaching composition full time at the university, Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. And then I got very sick and I had to quit my job. And I told myself, if I ever am healthy enough to write again, I'm going to finish a novel. And then we moved back to Southern California because there were no jobs in Corvallis, Oregon for my husband. And he got a job here. And then I got well. And then I finished my first novel, which became my first published novel, Sacred. So there you go. 2012, November of 2012, my first book came out.
Love it. And you're a word weaver. I love the imagery of you as a young person sort of reading in this library space as well. And you called it the sacred work. So I just love that.
It was. Yeah, it still is. I am still a reader, maybe probably more than I am a writer. Well, that might not be true right now, but I like it. My life feels better when that's true. It's seasonal. Last winter, I read so many books. I read like 16 books in December of last year, and it was wonderful. So yeah, maybe this winter I'll have a chunk of time again like that.
Are you one of those people that always has the stacks and the stack gets added to and all of
I
that?
have many stacks. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Same. Absolutely. So I was going to ask about the themes, the ideas that you like to explore in your work as well.
Well, that's such a good question. And it's something that I never think about intentionally. Now I've written enough books where I can't ignore it quite as well as I did in the early days because I can now see the things that tie my works together. But I never intentionally craft a book about an idea. I think that is the road to writing a sort of very sort of prescriptive book about how one should live their life. I always say if you have a moral, to impart or a theme that you want to teach in that way, you should just say it because it'll save, everybody a lot of work and time. So I don't really usually start with that, but I do see things emerge in my work kind of in pieces. So I have sort of my young adult work and I have, and my new, some adult work that I've been working on as well that's not published yet. And then I have my work for kids and I see, I think different parts of my brain are working on different things. I think in my YA, I work a lot with what does it mean to exist in a cisgendered female body, and who owns the body, and what is a body, and what is a person in a body. That comes up a lot in my work in that space. And then in the kids space, I think I write a lot about the home and about people's relationships with animals, and about finding community. And I suppose there's places where all of those things happen in the same book too. Like, sometimes my YA is more about community, like Red Hood actually is a community book about a werewolf hunter. So yeah, I think, and then my picture books I think are more like poems. Like one will just strike me, and I will write it. And if I'm lucky, it'll find a home. But those tend to rise up out of very specific moments in my life. I have one called Pip and Zip about a family who finds some abandoned duck eggs during COVID and fishes them out of the water and hatches them. And that happened after we found a couple of abandoned duck eggs during COVID and hatched them out. I have one called An Ordinary Day about birth and death that happened after my father died and a friend of mine had a home birth within days of each other. So those are in a category, I think, separately of their own. I think the main thing that I want to share that I think I see as a through line in my work is how incredibly awesome it is to be a human animal alive in this
Mm-hmm.
world. And I think I have a reverence and sort of a very lucky uh, sparklingness about the world. The world sparkles for me in a way that I think is in all of my work.
Yeah, no, you mentioned picture books as poetry, and I think of picture books as sort of a lengthier poem that spreads across pages, and then illustrations get paired with it. So I love the approach that you're thinking about and taking as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think about poetry while I'm doing it because then I get freeze up because poets are like, a special kind of creature. But I do think that the work in the picture book category is more like poetry than it is like fiction.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So curious about a time that you talked about community, and I think thinking about connections with the house that wasn't there and things like that. So curious about a time that you connected with a young reader, either
Yeah.
from a distance or in a school visit or whatever the context might be.
So I have two little anecdotes, and they're both about BAT because BAT is the thing that gets me invited to speak to students and connect with students more than any other book. I
Hmm.
actually have a number of letters I've received from teens and women about my YA, about not recognizing that they were in a abusive relationship until they read my book, or my book giving them words for experiences that had. So that's pretty meaningful to me. But the Bat ones are one. I went and saw a whole school. A whole school had read a boy called Bat, which I love when that happens. And they filed in all the kids, sixth grade down to pre-K, and the pre-K kids each was wearing a little stuffy in a homemade sling. They'd made slings like Bat wears. And the
Hmm.
entire time I spoke, the entire pre-K class shifted back and forth and rocked their little babies. And it was
Oh,
such a universally beautiful experience. And they were so calm and so focused. And I thought, yes, like my life feels more calm and focused when I'm holding an animal too. Like maybe we should all walk around, holding an
hmm.
animal all the time. The other one is actually came from a teacher who was reading a boy called Bat with her class. And there was a kid in her class who was he was diagnosed with autism. He was an autistic kid, but hadn't been told this by his parents. The kid's parents told the teacher. The teacher knew. And when she was done reading the book, he came up to the front of the class and asked if he could take it home. And he gave it to his parents and told them, "This is me. Like I am this kid." And it
Hmm.
opened up a conversation between the parents and the kid where they told him, actually, yeah, you're right. Like you were, have this diagnosis of autism. And it began a conversation between the teacher and the kid and the parents that got him to like sort of love and embrace and be able to put a name to an experience that he already had but didn't have words for. I think that's one of the
Wow.
things that's important
Wow.
in my work too, is like the things can't quite exist in the same way if we don't have the language to understand them. And then once we
Hmm.
put language there, the thing, it seems like it exists more fully and it's more physical, something we can touch and grab, like that
Hmm.
was for that kid.
Hmm. Wow, that is quite a story. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you now have a book that's soon coming, and that is The Blood Years. And curious about what you would want to share about that, as well as what it was
Mm-hmm.
like, because I know it comes from the place of a personal background that you're bringing to the story as well.
Yeah. So The Blood Years is my debut historical fiction novel. I tried really hard not to write historical fiction because it's really, really hard. In fact, my original idea was that I would write this book set in a near future where the Holocaust comes again. That was back in about 2013, before Trump and the rise of fascism made it feel not so fun to imagine that world. And it's a straight historical novel set in Chernovitz, Romania, um, before and during the war years, World War II. It's based on my grandmother, Frida, um, who was a teenager during those years in Chernovitz, Romania. And it follows her character. It's a novel, so the character's name is Rika, Fredrika, because my grandmother told me that I could use her story, but to name the character Fredrika. She always liked that name. And her sister, who's named Astrid in real life and is Astra in the book. And it follows the sisters and their sort of tumultuous love affair with one another. as they grow up in a family that is has a mother who is just continually heartsick over her philanderer husband, the girl's father, and their wonderful grandfather, who they call Opa, who is a rock for the family and a deeply religious man. And there's ballet, and there's bears, and there is a lot of sort of small family dramas, but it's happening right alongside just the almost unrelatable, it's so enormous, set of tragedies that befell my grandmother. She became ill with tuberculosis
Mm,
during the Holocaust years, and the Russians came and took over, and then the Russians were pushed out by the Nazis. And so all of that history is laid through the book too. And it was very important to me not to sort of sensationalize the Holocaust. Like, there's enough terrible stuff that happened during the Holocaust. The idea of like making stuff up
mm,
was
mhm,
gross to me.
mhm,
It felt disrespectful. I read a lot of books where people sort of, I actually don't read a lot of books. I read about a lot of books and then become very angry and shake my fist, where people sort of want to make the Holocaust their playground in a way. And they sort of mash up real characters. And like, well, what if this person actually did this and saved all these Jews? And it's like, that's, not what really happened. So
mhm,
all the things that happened in the book are all real. They either happened to my grandmother and her family, or they happened to someone that my grandmother and her family knew, or they happened to someone in some version. I fictionalize things through the hundreds of survivors' accounts I read, the dozens of memoirs that I read over, you know, over many years. Even the dreams that my character had are based on a series of dreams that were written down by a psychoanalyst student during the early years in Germany, when anti-Semitism was on the rise and Hitler was rising in power. This woman wrote down the dreams that Jews were having
mm,
and then smuggled them out of Germany. I have no idea what happened to the dreamers. Probably many, or if not most of them, died. So it was very important to me that it was a deeply researched story grounded in truth.
mm, mhm, mhm. Well, as somebody that teaches about the Holocaust in literature class, I also appreciate that because students come in with a wide range of rumors, half-truths, sort of
Yeah,
things that they've heard or read, and so I appreciate the
yeah.
time that you've taken to bring that story to
Thank
life through
you.
history as well.
Yeah, and there's an extensive list of reading list of the research that I did at the back. There's a foreword and an afterword that ground the story in the historical context. There's a timeline of how Chernovitz, what happened to Chernovitz during the war years, because it is a very specific region. Romania, it was Romania, now it's Ukraine, where my grandmother lived, had done its very best to sort of deny that they were culpable, and sort of, oh, it was
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
Nazis, it was the Germans, but the Romanians were very happy to, take up the mantle of anti-Semitism long before the Nazis came. Um, so yeah, it's very historic. There's also a teacher's guide that the good folks at Balzer and Bray have created, which I think is really so interesting to read a teacher's guide about one's work. It's like, did
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
things I didn't know I did? It's like, yeah, that is in there. It's a very interesting experience. I feel very grateful that they made that.
Wonderful, wonderful, and glad to share that. As I know teachers occasionally listen to the podcast
Yeah.
as well. So I don't want to gloss over anything or rush through anything. My last question it would be the spaces where people can connect and learn more about your work. But have we missed anything that you want to make sure to
I mean,
share
I could
with
talk for 17 hours about the blood years, but what only thing I'd like to say probably is that it is like, I really, really, really want everyone in the world to read this book. Um, so thank you for having me on.
Hmm.
And I really
Hmm.
hope that everyone will read and share the book. It's incredibly important to me. It's, self-promotion makes me practically break out in hives. I hate it so much. I always tell myself, my job is to write the next book. My
Hmm.
job
Hmm.
is not to care about who reads my book. I tell myself it's none of my business who reads my book. These are the things I tell myself so that I can craft my very best work. But in this case, I feel because it's not just my work. It's my grandmother's story, and it's the story of so many Chernovitzers who did and didn't survive, and the 6 million people who didn't survive as well. So yeah, I feel compelled to use any and all resources to encourage everyone to please buy and read The Blood Years.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, that's how a shy kid became a teacher because it's belief in the work. So,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
Mhm. So spaces online where people can go, websites to check out the teacher's guide as well as anything else that you'd like to share.
Yeah. HarperCollins has a Blood Years page. So if you go to harpercollins.com and type in the Blood Years, you can find out more about the book, as well as I believe there's a link there for the teacher's guide, which makes me remember I should put that link on my website as well, which I will. There's a website. My website is elanakarnold.com, and there's a page there about many pages, some about one about the Blood Years, others about some teaching that I do. And there's an events page. I will be on tour for this book, which I'm very excited about. So
Wonderful.
please come out and meet me if any of you happen to be at any of the cities. I'm going to get to tour with Brandy Colbert and Elliot Schrafer, who are two incredible authors, and luckily also friends of mine, which is very interesting that the three of us all have HarperCollins books out this year at the same season. Their books, Charming Young Man and The Blackwoods, are just fantastic. So I'm excited about that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, this will drop, excuse me, at the same time that the book is published, the week of launch, and I'll be glad to share those links in the description, as well as in the video. So thank you so much, Elana. It's great to meet you.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for your work helping people learn about our books and the teaching work you do as well. Thank you very
My pleasure.
much.
My pleasure. Thank you.